So, hello everyone. Welcome to the Innovative Cities Lecture Series. I'm Carolyn Eswine. I am the co-chair of the Urban Planning Department here at UW-Milwaukee. I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge in Milwaukee that we are on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland along the southwest shores of Michigamme, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. So we encourage you to explore different resources to deepen your knowledge and connections with Indigenous communities that were here before we were. So again, welcome. I just want to highlight that our final Innovative Cities lecture for this semester will be December 4th. It'll be the focus of pedestrian safety at night. We have two researchers, including my co-chair, Professor Bob Schneider. They have a lot of research they're going to share with you and some strategies for improving safety in your local streets. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Julie Emslie. She's the Economic Development Administrator for LaCrosse, and Patrick Schloss. He's the Economic Development Executive Director for West Allis. And they're going to share their process of using tax incremental financing tools for development, but also give you some project examples that highlight their different policies and strategies, some of their successes, and really lessons learned. I encourage you to post your comments and your questions in the chat, and we will have time at the end to go through some of your questions. So thanks for joining us, and I'll pass it to Patrick to kick off.
Good afternoon, everyone. Patrick Schloss here, Economic Development, City of West Allis. I've been here 20 plus some years and always involved in everything from, I'd say, Main Street to Wall Street with some of our smaller projects to large projects. But today we're going to talk about tax increment financing, which is the #1 economic tool in the state of Wisconsin. And in terms of using TIF, we start out our discussion today with a little bit of 101, and we grow this into a larger discussion of leveraging TIF for projects. Cities use TIF to redevelop sites, foster what their plan is as a community. The idea is to create jobs, create new tax space, to welcome investment, and address what some of your community issues are. The TID is the area that is designated for the TIF. It's established by statute, a process under 66.1105, in which you lock in the base value, and then what is invested and gain in terms of increment is used to help facilitate redevelopment on the site. The TIF process was adopted in 1975. The real premise of the TIF process is, what is the but for? Would this project go forward unless for TIF? Then that's really what's unique about TIF, is that it's a local control. The taxing jurisdictions participate in helping make a decision of waiving those taxes for a period of time in order to do infrastructure improvements or gaining a development or helping a company's headquarters grow. If you look at TIF, the main premise is, as the property value increases, of course, the taxes grow. And we use these slides for newly elected officials and keep things very basic in order to help the concept of TIF, because there are a lot of misnomers about TIF in terms of what people think it is. It's not a bucket of cash that is handed to developers. It's really a really negotiated, formed plan that helps facilitate development. And if you look here, the idea is adding taxes and doing things that are part of a community's plan too: streets, sidewalks, public costs, helping make a connection with the development. And that's what we do in West Allis. And at the end, the TIF district eventually will close. It's supposed to be temporary, and the increased value of those property values can come back into your tax base. The district is really a snapshot in time, looking at what is there now and how you can gain. And something that I will talk about in a little bit is opportunity costs. When you look at what's there today and it pays taxes as the base, that's what you've achieved today. But then what can be gained by the use of TIF? Is it worth it, the but for, to use that increment to really make a transformative type of project? There are a lot of people involved in the TIF process. It's a collaboration. Here in our city, we use, it's the economic development team, it's finance, planning, city attorney, elected officials. It's a broad discussion. But we also bring in Ellers, which is our bond counsel for TIFs. And we also use an outside financial consultant to help review performance. That information is then used for our city committees and help communicate what the TIF is achieving for our city. And then, of course, the Joint Review Board and all the taxing jurisdictions are involved in the process. We have around 20 TIFs. There are around 12 open and 8 closed TIFs in our city, and we're working on a couple new ones as we go. And if you look at how TIFs, and this is from our last TIF report, have really changed the landscape of our community, not only within the boundaries of a TIF, but even outside, which is not represented here, there's a significant gain in incremental value that our city has realized through the use of TIF. Is everybody hearing my voice? Just double checking.
Yes, we're all good.
So when we evaluate the opportunity to use a TIF, it's really a community decision. And a council, a CDA always has the right to do nothing. And that is the base value. And again, that opportunity cost. There are limited benefits when you just keep things status quo. You have a blighted property, it might stay there and linger. It may impact the growth of values around it. It may impact the image of your community. But the idea here is to facilitate change. And then some developed communities like to say, well, let's wait for the private sector to do something. And sometimes a private development is average. It might be fine to have no public involvement at all. And that's really up to the community's decision. Maybe it's less dense and it doesn't address some of the barriers that promote larger development, or it doesn't allow other future connections or improvements that are within a half mile. But the community makes that decision. And then option C, if you want to realize what can be achieved, and this is actually from a recent project here, we leveraged other programs besides TIF to help bridge some of the financial gap within the project. Here are some of the best practices I believe that communities can use, is to keep TIF as a transformative model or plan. Communicate when you use TIF, share the information, be open about it. That yes, there is closed door negotiations. That's part of the process. But if you keep everybody informed of what's happening along the way, it can be a positive experience. And then investment and success, showcasing what has been achieved and investing additional monies within the area. So in terms of transformative development, a TIF is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I mean, to be able to make a change in a neighborhood that is planned, consult with your planning team and be open to what you want to achieve with a site or with an area and be a partner. And it also has to be feasible. The feasibility of a project is really important, a very premise of TIF. So here's a project where our city acquired an adult establishment, a vacant restaurant, and had some land around here where we're having the developer demolish the property, create a new public space, and sell the land for $1 and provide MRO for the project. It's a small site, it's an infill project, and we had developers interested in doing multiple stories. But in this case, we're doing 8 townhomes and a small apartment building that is mixed use, and it's an infill project. So we're taking a public space and repositioning it and actually leveraging it to bring an attractive development to this corridor. And here's the actual increment that is gained. It's a small one, but not all TIFs have to be a big project, and this does a significant change for the neighborhood. One of the big things is, why is TIF being asked for? Interest rates have been really a big impact, construction costs, and there are gaps between what banks are willing to do in terms of financing. But the bottom line is what we like to do, and it's the PAYGO TIF, where a developer finances that increment stream, and then we provide that increment when it is realized to the project. When it comes to feasibility and negotiation, as a community, we're always trying to aim for the big vision. And what does the community want? Our goal here in our comprehensive plan is to grow our population by 10,000 people. But when we get into the performance on a project, we get into all the nuts and bolts. What are the construction costs? What are the rents? What is being leveraged from a bank? What's the debt coverage ratio? The endless list here of financial terms, we do get into those and review. We get into a lot of cases where we use TIF to address brownfield issues. And TIF is a great tool to address those conditions on a site. These are just some samples on brownfield conditions we've had in our city. And the bottom line when you use TIF is how much can a developer risk and how can you mitigate those costs through the creative financing of TIF. This is a Aurora clinic that was on an old factory site that I showed at the beginning. We actually used TIF to help clear the site, and then we used new market tax credits to help finance the $7 million clinic. I'm not going to get into the whole financial structure of TIF. We need another hour just for that. But bottom line, it's interest financing, it's subordinate financing, and it's actually a part forgivable financing that can bring into a project. So if you get a $10 million allocation of new markets, it equals around $2.3 to $2.4 million of equity that can be brought into a project. And this is the West, where this 177 new apartments that were built on that same factory site. And we used TIF, but we were able to negotiate through the development agreement that if this became wildly successful, that we would want to see some payback back to the community. So when we structured this, we had a construction savings agreement. We had success if they hit certain benchmarks. So if they refinance or sell the property, and there's a reasonable internal rate of return, and that can be 12%, it can be 15%, it could be 20%. It just depends on what risks you're trying to address and negotiate. And we get into all those fine numbers. We actually received several $1 million back to the TIF because we were kind of pioneering the market in terms of housing here. But when they went to refinance, they did receive interest savings, and we were able to share that with the city. Again, transfer development, looking at how you share this information. This is a concept we've actually learned from West Bend, and we modeled it here. And to kind of keep everybody on the same page, what is being achieved, what's being used, and keeping all the facts in front of the electeds and the public. This is our informational piece that we created for this land by label development. This is 248 new housing units on an old factory site. And in this case, yes, it's a high market rate development, but we're also using different financing tools such as EPA funds. And when we evaluate this is a sample of how we do the evaluation, looking at returns, what's the leverage return on the project, what's the stabilized debt coverage ratio, and figuring out what the project can achieve if we put X amount of money into the project, and always evaluate the performance. Another side of it is looking at the economic impact of the project itself. I mentioned opportunity costs before. So if we don't attract this housing development, what are potentially besides tax base are you losing? This is the economic impact of a new housing development in a community, showing that what can be in terms of economic output, what's the labor income, what can be spent in the neighborhood after 10 years. I mean, it's $63.3 million of economic input over the next 10 years from a new housing development. That's significant. And then everything with TIF is not an island. I'm going to say that over and over. If we created a boundary like this is actually the land by label project within a TIF. But if you did create a district of this, what happens around it is very important. In this case, we have a new grocery store coming. We have a new hotel. We have a new road that's connecting through, and trying to leverage all those other investments along with the TIF. In our city, we also do the half-mile improvements. Under state law, you can do improvements within a half-mile of TIF if you have increment that is gained. And we see that as a way to build momentum. And as I mentioned, TIF is not an island, so we're always trying to build connections with the projects. Now, TIF can be used for industrial to help change a community. A lot of community people see West Allis as the old industrial. This is an old picture of Alice Chalmers back in the day. And we actually used TIF recently to help Chris Hansen, which is a bioscience business in our city. It's been here since the 30s, actually expand. They invested $165 million into a new freezer expansion and other production. And if you ate yogurt or cheese today, you probably ate something influenced by Chris Hansen. It's a very silent business, which is they're actually called, Nova Nessus now. So they made a significant investment. It's a Danish held company here in our city, and we're very proud of that. And we use TIF to help address some of their costs. This is 68th and Mitchell, an old foundry site. You know, what can you do to leverage TIF to really make a difference? And this factory shut down. Even if they paid everybody minimum wage, they couldn't afford to keep it operating. And this was bought privately and raised. And this is TIF number 14 in our city, and it's actually performing quite well. It had a base value of 1.3, and we ended up attracting a behavioral health hospital that's taxable to the site. And we evaluated industrial against this health hospital, and this actually ended up paying a lot more in taxes that could be gained to the neighborhood. And after some community relations, the project ended up passing 10-0. And it is a positive addition with jobs and services that were needed in our city. But the benefit is that TIF is successful, and we're able to leverage it for another parcel in this same TIF for an historic renovation. And this project is going through the phase 2 on historical tax credits right now, and we're very close to launching this development. And if you looked at the sources and uses, yes, TIF is one part of the project, but we leverage other programs, WEDC, PACE, other financial programs that we can help bring to the table to bridge that gap. TIF can also be used to do other improvements. This was a building the city bought through TIF. We ended up selling it for a brewery. And just coming out of COVID, we went to 33 different banks, and we're able to help bridge the financing gap between what the banks were willing to finance. We provided some TIF financing to the overall capital stack to help a brand new place open. And it's that creativeness that any community can do with TIF that can really make a difference. And in 2023, this Oak Brewery, which is a 10,000 square foot brewery that has expanded now multiple times, became Shepherd Express #1 tap room. And leveraging investment around the half mile is very important. And this is a project, a factory building sitting idle that was bought by Parks and Recreation, just announced recently that they're going to do an entertainment venue here. And we provided some TIF assistance through the half mile process to help make a change on this site. That's all that I have on TIF. And I know Julie's going to share some great information on what LaCrosse is doing. Julie?
Okay, sorry everybody, I was trying to get my my technology to work.
All good.
Okay. Alrighty, so I will be talking with you today about some of the ways that we use TIF and LaCrosse, and with that I plan on weaving in some process and procedures so you not only know how the what, but the how of how we got there. I know what it's like to sit through a presentation about innovative projects and wonder, well, what are the nuts and bolts? What were the steps that you took? From there, oops, I moved too far ahead of my slides. From there, I will talk more specifically about tips and lessons learned that might not have been addressed with those two areas. And then finish with some ideas as we look forward into the future of TIFs with LaCrosse. I also just want to point out that I've included pictures in my slide of TIF supported projects in LaCrosse. These are all from within the last 10 years or so. Okay, so to just give you some context, so for LaCrosse, on the right-hand side of the screen, I have a map there of our current TIDs in the city. LaCrosse, if you don't otherwise know, is right up on the Mississippi River on the western side of the state. So everything to the left of the screen there is Minnesota. We have our half miles marked in this TID map as well. So you can see those wider circle-ish lines surrounding our TIDs. Patrick referenced those. We currently have 12 TIDs that are open. Our next TID closure is coming in 2026, and our most recent TID that we created is scheduled to close in 2047. And then as far as the ways we utilize TIF and some of the main ways that I thought would be worth talking about today, I'll be talking about the thing that I think most folks associate TIF with, which is developer incentives. I'll then move into ways we utilize TIF for city operational expenses and to fund capital expenditures, particularly via our CRP, our capital improvement plan process. Talking about the donor TID mechanism that has been critical for us, particularly as it pertains to a 65-acre site that is named River Point District that we have in the city. It has been literally a 30-plus year development in the making. And then we've also repeatedly utilized the affordable housing extension mechanism, and we're already anxiously looking forward to the next TID closure so that we can capture those TIF dollars and again, keep that momentum going for our affordable housing initiatives. So just moving into some process and procedures around developer incentives. So we have a formalized application process, and we have a formalized that application process. The framework for that is captured in our City Council adopted TIF policy. So it includes a $10,000 minimum application fee, as well as outlines the required documents that need to be included in any TIF request that the city receives. Our TIF policy also speaks to the city's goals and objectives in utilizing TIF and what projects are even eligible for TIF. It also states clearly that the onus for making the case for the but-for use of TIF is ultimately on the developer, not city staff. So although we're pretty instrumental in bringing it all together and facilitating the process, it is the developer or the applicant who's really truly making the ask and has to justify why the city should support this project. Our TIF policy also provides requirements of any TIF request and how it should be structured, the parameters within that. And I have a handful of those listed on the slide. And that includes like our equity requirement, a TIF cap, taxable increase requirement, and so on. The main parties who are involved in our TIF application process are city staff. So predominantly me, I'm in the planning department and I facilitate the process. But of course, we work with key staff in our finance department, as well as legal. Our city attorney is who drafts our development agreements. And of course, we engage other departments as it makes sense. Typically, engineering might be another one that is involved in just some of the provisions that might be in the development agreement. And then beyond that, there's the applicant or the developer. Our third-party consultant, we actually also work with Allers to provide analysis and review with our TIF applications, but also they assist with our overall TID compliance and just financial planning. I can't say enough about how helpful that is to me, if nobody else, to piece this together, to have a third party that can come in and be someone I can work through that is also working with other municipalities and can provide some perspective. Also just working in a community that we all are a part, to have somebody to be on the outside and be objective, fully so, is also very helpful. And then our governing bodies. And so in LaCrosse, we have the main governing board that interfaces with TIF assistance is our Economic and Community Development Commission. So they provide oversight to the process. And then once we're ready to bring a development agreement forward, they make a recommendation to the council. And ideally, that would be a unanimous recommendation for approval if we've gotten that far in the process. The steps we go through to get from application to development agreement are many, and it isn't always a straightforward process or path. But we do have some standard steps that we take, particularly as it pertains to the ECDC and then just the public knowledge and just discussion of this project. So one of the first things I do when I receive a completed TIF application, besides engaging Ellers, I send it to them for them to begin their analysis, and also engage the assessment department to get that estimated value upon completion, is I get them scheduled to be on the next ECDC agenda to provide just an introduction overview of the project. And that serves to do a number of things. So it wraps their mind around, starts to wrap their mind around this project if they haven't heard about it already. It signals that a TIF app has been received. It eases them into, or at least brings them along for the process, that we're not just showing up one day with a 35+ page development agreement that we're asking them to approve. We also get initial feedback. We've had TIF applications that have been presented, or excuse me, TIF applicants that have presented their project, and just the project on its face was something that was not anything anybody wanted to support. If that initial introduction or overview, I discourage them talking about, the developer talking at all about the monetary side of it or the ask that's being made of the city. We're undergoing the review, and when we come back to the ECDC, we want to give them a full picture that's been that we can all agree on the numbers that are being presented. So even before they know the ask, sometimes we find that they're just not interested in the project. It doesn't matter what's being requested for TIF assistance. The next step after that is we're working towards a term sheet. And I have also found including a term sheet to be immensely helpful. So it's a lot of time and energy to finalize a development agreement that all parties can agree to. And if we can't agree on the high level terms, like what's the point in moving forward. I think putting things in writing also helps. There's many times when you're tracking along, you think you're tracking along with somebody, and then you put things on in writing and even send it to an email and say, hey, does this look good to you? I'm not asking for a signature, but are we on the same page? And all of a sudden the wheels come to a screeching halt. So that is helpful, and it level sets with everyone, also including our governing body, our ECDC, to make sure we're tracking on the right page, that they're supportive of what we're putting together. It also breaks down the process into a digestible process that feels transparent, that again, we're not just coming forward and saying, okay, here's the development agreement that is written in legalese, but rather here's the overall, we're stopping and pausing here to make sure we're people are aware of what's being requested and that everything's all good. The term sheet, our term sheet is not binding anyway. It just gives us direction and provides guidance. When we present the term sheet, we also present memos that are that articulate, of course, the narrative of the project and the sources of uses, but these come from both myself and from Ellers, and they go through the analysis items. So kind of the things that Patrick mentioned, your total development cost, developer fee, rents, operating expenses, and so on, and speaks line by line in an objective way of how they compare to industry standard, to other applications we receive, to the market, and so on. I also specifically provide a memo that speaks to the TIF policy, and again goes line by line of saying, yes, here's where we're at on the equity investment on this project. Here's how this meets or doesn't meet the TIF cap potentially. And that I find also is very helpful. And then we move forward to the development agreement. And of course, we capture all of the items that were outlined in the development or in the term sheet is included in the development agreement. But there's, many items in our TIF policy are incorporated into the development agreement. And then there's other things that are just standard practice that we have in our development agreements. And I have some of those listed on the slide. And we really try to not deviate from those except in truly exceptional circumstances. So once we get to the development agreement, it can sometimes feel like, great, we've accomplished it. It's, we're done. And there's truth to that too, but it's also important to have the ongoing administration and compliance. And so we're still working through that process. We're always fine tuning it in the city of LaCrosse. But as a just general rule, our payments are all structured to be sent by September 1st for all our development agreements. We have it just uniform across the board, which helps administratively. And then as staff with appropriate departments, we meet together usually in May or June, knowing we have that September 1st target date to assess the projects to make sure that they're adhering to all the compliance items and then address any remedies that need to happen. And then we also get down to the exact cent of what the payment should be for the project. That is captured in a memo that we then bring again before the ECDC or potentially another governing body, if it applies, to approve that memo that captures all those items, including those payments, and we shoot to have that in July. And I just bring these things up because I have just found that, TIF is complicated. It's there is a lot of misunderstanding about it, and we are many times working with millions of dollars. And so help creating a process with decision makers and knowing that they have a cadence that you're going to be bringing forward these items that they can ask about and can understand. I have felt is really helpful. The process then feels intentional and thoughtful. It helps them to put all the pieces together as well. So they are brought in at the overview, the introduction, they see the term sheet, they get the development agreement, and then on an annual basis, when that project is performing, they see it play out. And it also feels transparent, as I'm sure all of us can relate to. Having a balance between how much you engage your governing bodies it can be tricky to strike that balance, but those are things that have worked for us. So moving on to beyond developer incentives, we also regularly use TIF to fund city capital and operational expenses. And this is mostly done through our CIP process, that capital improvement plan. So respective city departments are aware of the resource. They submit their budget requests to use TID dollars like they would almost any other request, even using GO bonds or another source. And then many staff play a role in making that happen. Mine is primarily to determine the compliance. So when requests come in through our process, through our system, I review it to see if it is possible to do that. Not should we do it, but can we do it? So things like is it allowable with state statute? Is it something identified in the project plan? Is it even within the TID boundary that the TID that was identified to support that project? Of course, we're also looking at things like, is there money in the TID to support that? Finance really helps. Our finance department really helps with that aspect. We also utilize TIF admin as part of our operational budget to staff, to help fund staff positions. So we have many different staff who are interfacing and are helping to administer TIF and TID districts or TIF related projects or initiatives. And a portion of their salary is paid through that TIF admin that's allowable as well under state statute. We have to, of course, allow for instances that aren't foreseen and otherwise don't fit into these processes of the CIP or operating budget. So those, of course, are approved via our resolution. We try to avoid those, but we know we have to work with them, and that could be, acquiring sites or a pilot initiative or an unforeseen budget expense. And we try to follow the same thing where I still review it for compliance and so on as if it were in our normal budgeting process. I also just have to say that in order to make this flow and come together, it's not always perfect, but we have regular interdepartmental meetings to discuss many things. But, of course, our TIF and TIDs is something that we're constantly looking at, cash flow spreadsheets and tools, updating them, planning for possible extensions or projects that are coming down the pipe, and so on. So here's just a quick snapshot from our latest CIP that was approved in LaCrosse. We do a 5-year budgeting CIP. So this is for 2025 through 2029. And shows some of the projects that have been funded in their respective TIDs or that were approved to be funded. So you'll see, streets, housing programs, a facade grant program, greenways and corridors, trails, neighborhood development, plans, bridge replacement. I've mentioned that we have relied heavily on our donor TID option, particularly as it pertained to River Point District. So just to give you context of where River Point District is, it's our TID 18, which is this pink district right here, pretty centrally located. So as I said, it's a 65-acre site that has had significant preparation costs in order to get the site ready for development. It was in the floodplain. It has had tons of environmental cleanup. Mobile Oil was based out of there for many years. The railroad, you can imagine. So we have the Black River, the Mississippi River, the LaCrosse River, hence why it's called River Point District, that all abut this site. And it's a prime location of this, the city's been around for a number of years. So what it was used for over the past is not what we want to have it used for today, as well as just infrastructure costs to get on that site. So this site up until a year or two ago was completely publicly owned by the RDA in the city. And that means that the assessed value and tax base has been $0. So we were able to fund all of the improvements to get this site ready for redevelopment, which was in the 7 to 8 figure range for a 3-phase site preparation through the use of donor TIDs. So we've primarily utilized our TID 13, which is our quick trip TID. That's actually the largest one, at least as far as just the overall properties within it. If you didn't know, Quick Trip is headquartered in LaCrosse, and that TID is very healthy. And so that donor TID mechanism allows you to transfer TID dollars from one TID to another, and it enables the recipient TID to use those dollars as if it was created by that district itself. That also includes past the expenditure periods. You probably can't see it on my tiny map or the tiny numbers, but Quick Trip TID, actually, the expenditure period was in 2021. But because we did that donor TID allowed for it to be a donor TID, we are able to transfer those TID dollars to TID 18 to get that project going. And here's just a quick an overview of River Point District right now. So again, to orient you, the Mississippi River flows along right here. The LaCrosse River is on the bottom. This bottom half is actually marshland, so it's undevelopable. But these developments are all currently in different stages, from pre-planning to actually construction. We have a couple that are completing construction within the next couple of months. Okay, so moving on to the affordable housing extension. So if you're unaware of this, this is allowable also, and an allowable extension via state statute. So it allows for a 1 year from the TID's resolution date to utilize that increment to benefit the affordable housing. So those funds can be used anywhere within the municipality. That's something that's unique with TIDs. Usually they're geographically restrictive. However, at least 75% of it must be used for affordable housing, and that's defined as 30% of household income, and the remainder can be on housing in general. There also is no deadline to expend those funds, so that's another unique thing, that TID dollars typically have a deadline with them. The common uses, as I know them to be in the state of Wisconsin, are to fund large affordable housing developments, to establish a revolving loan or grant program to increase home ownership or improve existing affordable housing. That's essentially what we've done in LaCrosse. So when TID 4 closed, we used a little over $1 million for replacement housing program. When TID 6 and 7 closed, we used $2 million to create and then go on to sustain the affordable housing revolving loan fund. Our next TID that's scheduled to close is TID 14. That's the Gunderson TID that closes in 2026, and we're anticipating $1.5 million for that. So just I'll transition here then more into just general other tips and lessons learned. So I know I'm like the first thing I have on my slide, educate your stakeholders. Well, duh, right? We hear that all the time, but it's so true. Patrick referenced this too, that it sounds like they do this with their decision makers or their elected officials, but we do have an orientation where I regularly present about TIF. And I continually stress the but for any time I get the chance to just remind everyone that these projects would not exist but for TIF. And then we have a process to back that up. It's not just a subjective call that's made, that we can show on paper, it pencils out that this project would not go forward if it was not supported by TIF. I spoke about our TIF policy. I have found that to be very helpful. There is always a balancing act. I'm sure it's just with any policy, but finding balance and having an integrity of your process and being too prescriptive. We actually, a few years back, dialed back our TIF policy and made it less prescriptive. And that has been helpful to us. I've talked about the options of donor TIDs and looking into those. We've also utilized extensions where we've extended our TIDs, and that's also been very helpful to us. This goes without saying, but having a clear and fluid process, we hear that all the time from applicants and developers. They want to know where they're going and how they get there. And so to be able to communicate that and to know what that looks like is very helpful to them. Putting a development together and getting it off the ground is a juggling act. And so it's helpful when your TIF process is one less variable that they're trying to always manage and figure out how it works. I referenced the third-party review. That has been extremely helpful to us in engaging someone else that's an expert on this. Identifying the city's point of contact for TIF, so that just clear, this goes into your clear and fluid process, but that helps, and not just for public facing or for developers, but within the staff has also been critical. This goes without saying, every project is unique. I've had many developers who said to me, one of the first meetings, is, oh, I know what you did for that other project. So, and I immediately thought, well, I can list 100 things that makes that project completely unique. So let's talk about your development. But still understanding that a process can still be standardized, that gets you to where you need to be in assessing that project. A few more here. One thing that we changed a few years ago when we updated our TIF policy was we used to have it restricted to just affordable housing. We have it now for all types of housing, and that has been put to use. We have a pretty active TIF pipeline, at least for our city. We also pay-go and developer finance is our standard. Very rarely do we do any upfront TIF support or financial support through a loan or what have you, or even a grant. We have actually limited or removed job creation requirements. So for a number of reasons, job creation in the world of economic development too is, I feel like, a dying metric that is being used rather than job retention and whatnot. But overall, it was administratively burdensome. The ROI on having this was very hard when COVID in particular came along. And what do you consider remote, or what happens when you have workers that work for the company that is in LaCrosse, but they're working remote? And it didn't prove for us to be worth it. This is a quote. The next one I have on there is a quote I heard recently at the WIDA conference, that lots of communities want everything but don't want to give anything in return, which, we see that sometimes with our elected officials or just in general with city staff as well, that there's give and take on both sides. We also require self-sustaining TIF projects. So I've had developers too that have come with an application and they want us to go beyond the increment created by the project itself to support the project. And we don't typically do that. Again, it would be just a unique circumstance that we would consider that. We want the projects themselves, the increment that the project creates to support the project rather than pulling from other TID dollars or potentially a donor TID. Of course, working to understand and support efficiencies in other city-related processes, but city-related processes, for me has also been very helpful. And there's a number of areas that this could be the case. But of course, these developments are interfacing with the city in so many different ways. And so supporting those, understanding them, it's a work in progress, but that is something that has been really helpful. And I know that our developers, our applicants appreciate. And then my last point here is it's more than just hard dollars and cents. With TIF dollars, we get, in structuring TIF, we get so into the weeds of the numbers and the financials and the analysis, and sometimes we missing the forest through the trees. And I know that our leadership many times has, our members of our leadership have pointed that out, is where, yes, we want to make sure that this cash flows and it makes dollar sense, but let's not lose sight of the fact that with this project, like, we are creating hundreds of housing options, which we desperately need. So, or what our vibrancy or reinvestment into a much needed area of the community to also realize it's hard to capture the impact of what those mean, and especially intangible benefits. The last slide I have here is just some things that I thought I would share that looking forward of things that I have on my radar or on my list of things I want to tackle. So I think that our application and policy process is an iterative process, that we'll continue to work through. I will say, when I was invited to do this lecture, I right away was like, oh man, but our policy needs so much work still, because when I see it, I see like things that, even though we just updated a few years ago, you can always see things that need to be changed or could be better. And so I'm thinking about ways that we can do that, not to always be stuck in that, but to have a cadence again that we're sitting back down and looking at it and saying what needs to be changed, what are other communities doing better that we can fold in. We're constantly thinking about timing of our TID closures and what future TID creations we're going to have happen. Utilizing our redevelopment authority more too with our TIF dollars. They have been a good leverage point in some ways when we need to transfer dollars over to be less restrictive, but still have stay in the process, and really pursuing that more. We've been talking a lot too about incorporating more city priorities into our TIF policy. So we've been throwing around the idea of having a requirement for public art to be included as a percentage or a small part of any TIF application or any project that's receiving public dollars, as well as issues addressing climate change resiliency. So the city of LaCrosse has really been highlighted in many ways for the work that we've done to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And we've talked about ways to incorporate that as well into our TIF projects, or TIF supported projects. A stakeholder survey is also just standard best practice, but I've thought many times too of surveying those our applicants and development agreement, the developers, and say, what could we do better besides give you more money? But what are things that would help us to improve, as well as from our council members and decision makers? Well, how can we keep them better informed, or what would they like to know, or what do they see as places for improvement? City staff as well. So just folks that are working with us, that we can continue to fine tune our process. Small scaling TIF is something too that I'm very interested in. All of our TIF has been directed towards large projects as far as direct to developer incentives. And I've yet to really kind of wrap my mind around any options of small scaling it. When we've used TIF dollars, it's usually been through a CIP request, that then the program that we run with that's administered by city staff, that then smaller developments access. And it could even just be, a single family home. And then also just better leveraging of TIF admin. So as budgets are tight and we're always trying to make those numbers work with our operating budget, we're pretty confident that there's ways that we could better utilize that. So when we have our streets department submit for a street to be improved with TID dollars, they're not typically incorporating the staff time that goes into it as well. They're just incorporating the expenses, the capital expenses, not the staff. So we've thought about, we're looking into ways to also use that to help improve our budget. And that is all I had. So with that, I think we can open up to questions.
Amazing, both of you. Thank you so much, because we've had our viewers ask for a more detailed dive into TIF, and this has been excellent. So a great resource Thank you for sharing your contact information with everyone. I think it's useful because it's not just what we typically understand about TIF, but it's also the capacity to extend beyond, as well as covering some of your administrative costs. I don't know that everybody talks about that. So we do have a couple questions. So one question, and I think we've had viewers actually respond to how they're doing with the policy. So based on sort of the economic environment we're in, the question is, have you adjusted your TIF policy, or is it just how you review them? Specifically, they're saying, Ellards is used to seeing and accepting 12 to 14% internal rate of return, but that maybe isn't the case anymore. So can you each talk about, have you adjusted it? And if not, how are you responding to different economic conditions?
I think
Do you want to?
West Allis, Julie, I'll go first, and you can say some
That
things.
works
I
for
mean, I saw that question. I think it's all deal oriented. I mean, there are people that come in and want 18%, and that's what their models show, but we evaluate all the factors that go into that number. It is not only the IRR, but what they paid for the site, the interest rates, what the bank is willing to commit. I mean, it all comes down to what you can all leverage into the deal. So there are multiple factors. We've seen 12%. We got deals coming in at 12%. We had before the interest rates, we were at 15% commonly. So I have not seen above that, though I hear developers wanting that. But it's definitely an evaluation of the whole performa.
Yeah, and we at the city, we in LaCrosse, we recently adopted a updated TIF policy in January of 2023. That was a long time in the making, even before COVID. But that we actually had our TIF policy in our ordinance, so we transferred it to a separate document that just made it just so it wasn't as cumbersome, and for a number of other reasons that we weren't like adjusting the municipal code. And then through that, we also provided more flexibility. So the level of incentive that could be provided, our TIF cap was raised, it actually was doubled. I spoke about the affordable housing we moved to allow for all types of housing. We incorporated reference to, I mentioned the climate action plan in our TIF policy. So we did update it, but there was a number of things that we went through to update it. And I think it would, whether COVID happened or not, that would have been needed. I will say, I think it's fair. The mayor, I've heard him speak about this a lot, that he thinks that that's one of the most influential things what we've done during his term, and I always laugh because that's one of the things I'm involved in. So, and he does so many other, influential things, but I do think it was helpful for us, and we provided a lot more flexibility so it wasn't prescriptive. We also have a section in our TIF policy that allows for special considerations that says, essentially says, here's our guidelines, here's our parameters that help us structure this, and know where to tell the developers, no, it's in our policy. Like you have to figure out how to make it work, or, like this is what we have to work with. But there is a special considerations that allows us to, as the council, essentially to override and say, in this instance, we're going to provide beyond what our policy states.
I think that's critical because you have the criteria or the standards, and then if you make a change, at least there's I guess an explanation or justification of going above and beyond. Dan, did you have a comment that you wanted to add to from Madison's perspective of the program you're referencing?
Sure, if you're okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
Julie, to your point, you had a comment about sort of small scaling TIF into the community. Am I getting that correct?
Yes.
So one of the things that we've found that's helpful, and I think you touched on it, is setting aside those dollars for programs. We have we have what's called the Commercial Ownership Assistance Program that helps folks purchase small sites. I think the max is 250,000, and we allocate dollars in our TID project plans for that. That's run by the city. We have a building improvement grant that can be used for essentially just sort of build out of space, tenant improvements and things like that. That's also run by the city. And we have a small cap TIF program that's run through the city, but we work with Madison Development Corp to do the underwriting. And we put dollars into that as well. And what happens there is we provide the dollars, and MDC has the underwriting horsepower, so we don't have to underwrite all the loans, but the council still approves them. So we set dollars aside in the project plan, and then MDC goes out and shops those around to prospective users of those programs. So that's one of the challenges we've had as well. And it's what we've really been finding, especially with things like the building improvement grant and the commercial ownership assistance program, is they are really helpful for small businesses, especially like up and coming folks, historically underrepresented communities and things like that. So if I can post the links in
Sure.
in the
I think
chat.
you can share some links. I think we're seeing a comment also, Alpaca's probably doing something similar in terms of a donor tip, which is
Yeah.
referenced.
Yeah, we've done that with donor TIF as well. We
Yeah.
put a lot of that into South Madison, but I'll post some links.
Thanks. There's another question, because I think this is something I hear from communities is, what are your examples or lessons learned if it's an underperforming TID? How do you work through that? I'm going to start with Julie. Unless you don't have any
I was
underperforming.
just gonna say, I know, I hate to be like, well, we don't have that problem. Yeah,
Patrick,
Patrick, you go and let me think on it, because we
Yeah,
have been
thanks.
lucky enough that hasn't been an issue. I'm sorry. We don't, it's not
I
like
would
we
say
have
right-
plenty of other dirty laundry. I should say dirty laundry, but other things that we're working through, we're trying to, but that's not one of them.
Okay.
I would say right now, looking at a few of our industrial TIFs that we just revaled our whole city. And I see a shift on the state actually assesses industrial properties, but I see a shift in terms of their values. And I think that was kind of interesting to see. I had to do a little bit more dive into that. Underperforming wise, we've done the donor TIFs to help pay for underperforming TIFs. We're actually going to be taking that up on 2 TIFs here very soon. One is an industrial. It's done everything it's said it's going to do. It just by value is not hitting the number in terms of the increment enough to pay off the debt. I mean, it's 90,000 square feet built. It's like headquarters. It's doing everything. It's assessed by the state, and those industrial values aren't hitting the number that we projected. And that's even having outside people look at it and having Ellers and everything. And it seems like it's not only us, it's across the state in terms of some of those TIFs. But donor TIF usually resolves it. Or we try to do we've done a overlay district where you finish what you can and then start a new clock if necessary.
Is the assessment issue specific to industrial or other uses?
Well, of course, the whole office market has changed.
Right.
Oh.
That's what I'm getting. Since COVID, there's
Yeah.
been some shifts in the market.
There's
So is
shifts
the
in the
assessment
office values.
responding to that or not?
Yeah. One of our largest projects was TIF number 7, which is Summit Place, 650,000 square feet of office. As you know, it was a mega in terms of a TIF, generating lots of increment. It still generates lots of increment, but it's not the same after COVID. And then we had another project that was going to build 350,000 square feet of office that was created right in 2018, and that's pivoted now to, actually showed the land by label project, 248 units of housing, a $78 million project. It probably evaluate out better than office in the long run. But we had to pivot. Office isn't there anymore. So.
Okay. All right. I'm going back to the first person who asked some questions because there were several. Can you just talk a little bit more about the pay as you go? And their comment is specific to, is there any concern about its feasibility related to construction, the monetization for construction? Are you hearing any concerns, or do you have any concerns?
I mean, I would say on our end, we just kind of present it like this is the option that's available, and you have to make it work. I mean, And we understand that, one of the things that we do when we present these dollars to the governing bodies is we show the discounted amount of the TIF, the net present value of the TIF. So basically, if we're giving just throwing out make-believe numbers, but if we're going to give $2 million in TIF assistance, we show that it's really value to the project at 1.3 when you take out all of when they're actually going to be receiving those dollars and because they're monetizing it. So there's an understanding of that. But I think to that end, on that question of the previous question kind of flows into this. And one of the reasons I would suspect that we haven't run into issues with our TIDs underperforming is because the PAYGO, we're not doing a lot of upfront borrowing. We are paying out the money as it goes. I would also say, like, one of the things I tell the developers is it's so much easier to get this money through when people understand the concept of, look, we aren't paying a dime out until we get it first. And the way I explain is they make their tax payments that year. And then our policy is to retain 15% for admin. And so they make their tax payments. If they're good, then they do that in the earlier part of the year. Come June, we sit down, we look at the assessed value, all the other compliance factors. If they're good to go, then we send them back 85% of that payment. It's that balance too of not being a jerk, but being like, I will be helpful and I will be clear. And this is what we have to work with. I understand it's frustrating, but we have other developers that are able to make this work. So we just kind of hold to it. And in the end, we haven't had too many deals walk away because they couldn't figure that component out. And I do think it's becoming more standard overall.
I think also your success is people know this is what's expected to have a successful TIF and to get approved. So if you meet it, you're doing well, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know both of you, when we chatted before, as we're preparing for this session, you had both mentioned about the fee for art. I know today you also added, Julie, climate change. Can you both talk a little bit about where you see challenges, resistance to that, and then where there might be opportunities to bring that in? Patrick, do you want to start?
Yeah, we've kicked that around, the concept of adding art as a requirement within we're still, as a community, our biggest hurdle is just bridging the gap in order to get us a feasible project. No matter what other things we add in, it still has to get paid for, and who's paying for it. So if the developer can only get so much financing and there's X gap and we're only hitting 12% return or 15, we have to get to something that's actually working. And over time, we do charge the admin fee that Julie talked about for our city staff, etc. We might be able to use some of the increment that's gained to the TIF, that it's admin and for art and things like that. But our concern is there going to be enough increment to just get the project going? And the nice thing is, if we can get a project that can really generate enough increment, the art concept is something that we can tell the developer we'd like to see. There's some communities that had a 1% of the increment fee for art, or the developer has to do so much art within the district. And we like to see more of that. It's hard to fund those things that create place, but we're also dealing with connections, bike trails, and lights, and road cuts, etc., that are needed, and those are significant costs as well. So
Julie, do you have any final comments as we close it out? Just a reminder that Light just put the survey in the chat for those of you who could give us your feedback about today and ideas for future speakers. And remember to register for the December 4th ICL. So Julie, final thoughts?
Yeah, so I think for us, the things we've run into is that same thing, is that if we require that, then there's going to be an expectation that the city's going to pay for it by increasing the support to the project. The value of art, I think, is something too, like, is this something that the community could support? I'm less, I feel like that would be something that a hurdle we could get across. But I know even too, how do you define public art? Is that architecture? Is that a sculpture? I know when we've been throwing it around just as staff, like, how would we even develop a policy? These developments are so complex, and are we adding unnecessary complexities to it that just make it overly burdensome, that they're just not going to move forward? And then two, with that, like, are we being overly prescriptive, and versus what's on offer on the table today? Those are some of the things that have made it a little cumbersome.
Okay. amazing information. I think it's really useful, and some of it feels like it's very technical, but we have everybody who's initially learning TIF to people who've been doing this for a couple decades. So I really appreciate you crossing all of those spectrums of knowledge and sharing your expertise with us. So thank you
Thanks
to
for having
everybody
us.
attending. Yep. Glad to have you both here. And for everyone else, we'll see you at our next ICL on December 4th. Thank you.
Thank you.